And welcome. Thank you for coming, and thank you very much to our presenters this afternoon. I shouldn't be doing this. Michelle Shah, who set up this session, was very much hoping to introduce, but she's flat on her back, heavily anaesthetized while a dentist does awful things to her molar. So we send our best wishes to Michelle. We'll briefly introduce Lawrence and Pepe in her place. Lawrence is of Sicilian and Irish background, grew up on the east coast of the States, and then moved to the west coast. He trained as a chemist, wasn't finding it terribly fulfilling, got interested in wine and was looking for a job in a winery lab, which he was offered in 1995 by Edmeades, which is one of the Jackson family wineries. And that was as I said, in 1995. He's still working for Jackson Family Wines, but in Italy, which is obviously very close to his heart. Before, en route to Italy, he worked in New Zealand, Australia, Chile, and Sicily. So a lot of background there. Pepe is also an interesting background, Swiss and Spanish. He's lived in Italy for 20 years and has an enormous enthusiasm for Italian wine, where he has worked for a number of important companies, including Biondi Santi, but for the last 5 years for Jackson Family Wines. And he is global ambassador for Tenuta di Arceno. So over to them to tell us about this fascinating and beautiful Chianti Classico estate, or Tuscany, because we're going to talk about the varietals.
Yes, thank you to everyone for this introduction. And I'll hope we have a good hour together and look at this beautiful estate that Lawrence and myself are working. The first question, obviously, that comes up in all this is, what does that mean? That name mean, Arceno? And a long history about it, because it has origin in Etruscan, in the Etruscan language, arche, or even in the Greek language. If you think at words like archaeology or archetype, architecture, all this brings you to this origin. So the origin of the estate of the Etruscan civilization, it all took place in this part of Tuscany, 15 minutes drive away from Siena. We can state that there was at the estate already wine production in the 17th century, so really a long history back. But what actually is very important to the estate is these noble families that went through. In 1700, it was acquired by in 1500, it was acquired by the Daltaio family. And you have all probably heard about the Mezzadria in Italy, in the rural parts of Italy. So they started acquiring different houses and land parcels to make this very huge estate that these days is Tenuta di Arceno. They started also with all the architecture, all the houses, the farm steads, and passed it over at a certain point to the Piccolomini family, another family that noble family, very famous especially in Tuscany, which were responsible actually for the let's say aesthetical point of view of the estate, because as you will see through the presentation, beautiful houses and places that you can still these days see at the estate. Not only the statue that you see on the left side of the screen at the moment, which represents a little bit the philosophy of the estate, this duality between modern and ancient, between human and animal in this form, and we will talk about that maybe later. But the real history about the production of wine at the estate started actually with the acquisition of Barbara Banke and Jess Jackson of the estate in 1994. They just had a trip to Italy and fell in love with this place and acquired 1,000 hectares of land. And we can maybe go to the next image. What was fundamental when they acquired and when they saw the potential of this estate was actually that it all is based on the winemaking. And it was also the time where they had met Pierre Seillon, our founding winemaker, and he just changed completely the whole production at the estate. So this was something very, very important because Pierre has always had this philosophy of the micro-cru about dividing the estate in different portions, in different vineyards. And at the time, in the years 2000, that was nothing that you would find normally in Tuscany. So on his side also, we find Michele Pezzicoli on the right side on this picture. Michele is also, since the beginning at the estate, he has planted probably every single one of the vines that you see at the estate. So really the memory, the historical memory of the vineyards. And the third man on the picture is Lawrence Cronin, who will talk afterwards about himself. But this is actually the most important part of the whole estate, the team that started with the winemaking, with producing wines at a completely different level than it was done since 1600s to the beginning of the 20th century. And if we get over to the next image, I'll present you also the other people. Well, of course, on the left side, you see, on the right side, you see myself. And Liz has already made the introduction, so I don't think I have to explain too much. In the middle, you see, I sometimes say a piece of our history, but she never liked that in that way. Makes her look old, she says. But actually, Sandra Gonzi is our general manager since the first day at the estate. She's even worked before for the estate when it was not yet belonging to the Jackson family. She was selected by Jess Jackson himself to bring forward this Tenuta di Arceno project. Yeah, I think this is a little bit our team with Lawrence on the other side, since 20 years now in Italy at Arceno, living and producing the wines and the vineyards. So if it is now the time to talk about the estate, I think it's himself the best man to talk about it.
I'll just add quick, when you were talking about when Pierre came here and we changed the way the vineyards worked. I remember in 2002 that dropping fruit here was a phenomenon for everybody. They were afraid to drop fruit. They couldn't understand to keep the production low for the quality high and not to pick a whole vineyard together. So that micro-cru and quality approach really in 2002, 2000 wasn't really here yet. So it was kind of the beginning. I'll talk about our neighbors, everything also. But so Pierre kind of started the revolution for quality here in a way. I don't know, I just said that, okay? So I'm talking now, Pepe, it's me?
Yes, you are talking, yes, please.
Okay. So the estate, here we go. So this is a great video map to understand the contours of the terrain. When I saw this the first time, I was quite happy to understand how mountainous and how varied our altitude and meters and soils are. Because when you're coming into Castelnuovo Maradagna, you can start to see our estate, and there's lots of little hills and little elevations. You notice most are facing west, okay? for better sun and better exposure. And that's usually the best, but sometimes on the east side, as it's getting global warming, east side of the vineyards now is not so bad place because it's a little cooler. So we can put things like Merlot on the east side of the vineyards, of the mountain. We're 1,000 hectares estate on the lower part with 92 hectares of vineyard. And we recently acquired the upper part of the estate, another 17 hectares. So we're at 110 hectares of vineyards right now. So let me see what this map is. Soon we'll get to the soils, but something really interesting, you can see we go from 347 meters all the way up to 600 meters at the top, and that happens in about 4 kilometers. So it's quite significant because in our 4 kilometers, there's a 2 degrees Celsius difference in temperature from the lower part of the state average over the year, from the lower part to the upper part. So that creates a lot of different characteristics of the wine, a lot of different micro crues and things like that. And as you can see from the soil, the lower part of the soils, the lower part of the state has a lot more clay, and the upper part has a lot more rocks, sandstone, and things like that. So I think we're going to pause here so I can think. When it's moving, it's hard to think. Pause. Okay. So again, you see the lowest part from 350 meters all the way to 600. And basically for harvest, in general, we start harvest going up the hill. The lower parts are Merlot. When you see the red part is Merlot, that gets ripe first. And that's on clay, mostly on clay. A lot of clay and a little more vigorous soil because Merlot needs that moisture. And the harvest starts with Merlot, and we start slowly going up the hill, and we usually finish the harvest at 600 meters with the Sangiovese up on top of the hill. It's not always like that, but that's kind of the general feel. But from this picture, you can see all the different blocks we have. We have about 50% DOCG, which is Sangiovese, and 50% Super Tuscans. So it's quite an even mix. When we can, I'm repeating myself, we try to put the Merlot on clay. The Cabernet Franc works almost everywhere. So we have Cabernet Franc that's on sandstone, Cabernet Franc that's on galestral rocks. And the Sangiovese is really important. You don't put it in any vigorous soil. If you put it in vigorous soil, you'll get big clusters. It wants to be a big cluster, so you're trying to keep that vigor down. So the worst soil is the best for Sangiovese. So 70% sand and things like that are really good for Sangiovese. Lots of drainage, and the clusters won't be it won't be too vigorous. You don't have to control the vigor. You see, we have a little bit of Petit Verdot. If you see that little blue strip, and that's we get about 15 barrels of Petit Verdot a year, and that's a little bit of a blender here and there. It goes into our Fauno, which is one of our wines, quite a rich wine. Let's see. Should I talk about Strada Rosato now, Pepe, or are we doing that later?
No, please move forward.
Okay.
With the video, yeah. Because we will have some images about where Strada Rosato comes from exactly.
Okay. So this is general where like the Sangiovese comes from for each brand.
Stop here.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. So right there. So one of the wines I think you might have the opportunity to taste is the Strada Rosato, and that's our grand selection, 100% Sangiovese from the Vineyard of La Porta, which means door, because in the entrance of the town of San Gusme, population 240. That's sort of our town, our hometown, if you want to say that. The soil is about 70% sand with 20% lime and a little bit of clay, not very much. So it's very poor soil. So the clusters get very small and really intense. Maybe a 250 gram cluster of Sangiovese. Sometimes Sangiovese clusters can be 400 grams. So it's quite a small cluster. So it's quite an extracted wine and quite a rich wine. The pH of the soil there is actually below 7, which is significant in a sense, because above 7 is also good, but below 7, you retain a lot more acidity. If it's like 7.2 pH, then you get a little less acidity, but a little more lush wine. So this is a type of vineyard, a type of area that gets really racy acids, really bright. Actually, I have the 2021 in front of me right now from the tank. That's what I'm actually drinking, of the Shadow Sasso. And the acids are quite bright, 6.2, 6.3 grams in 2021. A great aging wine, because Sangiovese, the backbone is the acid, so it ages on the acids. The thing you have to be careful with Sangiovese for aging is that I like to start with a lot of fruit and the acids, and hopefully the fruit and the acids come down at the same time. Sometimes if the fruit comes down too fast, you're left with a little bit too high acid. So that's the trick for Sangiovese, is to get the acid and fruit profile correct so they age in sync together. You can jump in any time, Pepe.
Yep. So we will see now here also the other wines, like Il Fauno. Most of the Fauno come from the lower part of the Merlot vineyards in San Giovanni. But Fauno is the wine that is remaining as a blend over the next years. While on most of the other wines, we will move to single varietals. And we will talk about that later, exactly what that means. So if we see the other two Super Tuscans that we have is Valladorna and Arcanum, Cabernet Franc based.
So basically right now we make 6 wines, 7, the Chianti Classico Annata, a Riserva, 2 Grand Selecciones, and 3 Super Tuscans. The Fauno, which Pepe just talked about, based on, it's like a Merlot Cabernet Franc mix, Valladorna, which is 100% Merlot, and Arcanum, which is 100% Cabernet Franc. And
yeah, you were a bit younger on that picture.
Yeah,
Lawrence.
Thanks.
So this is the town of San Busmé. Above the on the left side, you see the La Porta vineyard, where most of the Sangiovese for the Riserva and the Strada al Sasso come from. And all to the distance, you should see somewhere on those hills, Siena. On beautiful days, you see up all the way to Siena. I think it's now exactly where the sun shines. Yeah.
Yeah, a nice clear day, you can see the towers.
And also something very characteristic about our estate, when we talk about all these 67 or now almost 80 different blocks of vineyards that we have, is that each and every single vineyard has been planted following the best result for the production of grapes. And while in Tuscany, normally you will find vineyards that are just planted from north to south or from west to east, here at our estate, you will find this movement inside the vineyards of the rows following altitude lines, or maybe also just the soils difference. But every single block is really different one to the other. And it makes it very, very spectacular to see these vineyards.
And not many people have the curva. We call it the curva like this.
It's actually something that you see maybe more in Piedmont, where the rows of vineyard of vines follow the hills. But for Tuscany, it was something rather special.
I mean, also you can see right from that picture, you can see the different picks, because the sun does shine in different. On one part, it gets a little more afternoon sun, as you can see. So we'll actually pick that part with the sun first. That'll be one tank. The lower part will be another tank. And the upper side that's a little shaded will be third. So we got I pick about 4 different tanks from this one little curved block. So it's about microcrew, about the soils, but also about the sun exposure. So the idea is to get as many different lots as you can, to pick grapes that are in the same ripeness instead of picking a whole vineyard. And then later you can make the blend. So after harvest, I might have 120 different lots in the cellar, which eventually come down to 6 or 7 wines. So it's the best to pick the grapes at the same ripeness with each other. You don't want to pick some, some grapes that are ripe, some that are underripe to make an average. I'd rather have all overripe or all very ripe and all underripe together, and to be able to blend them like that instead of making an average sugar or something with things that are less ripe than others. So it's really hard and difficult to pick certain blocks because the soil changes through each block at the right time to get a perfect ripeness in the tank, not an average ripeness, the perfect ripeness.
So one thing that is also important to remember is that we are located in the Chianti Classico region, and the Chianti Classico is famous about being the first appellation worldwide that established a certain blend and a certain geographical extension. So we historically live from that word blend, a blend of, at that time, 300 years ago, red grapes with white grapes. Well, now we have obviously for the Chianti Classico only red grapes alone, but this background of the blend is something that really lives at the estate also, and we interpret the blend now obviously as a blend of vineyards more than as a blend of grapes, and we will see later on what that means. But if we talk now about, maybe switch over now to the production of our wines, what is very special about these wines is
Pepe, can
yes?
I just interject slightly? There's a couple of questions here.
Sure.
Keith Granger was asking about what size tanks are used for the micro crew. Can unsilence yourself, unmute yourself if you wish, Keith.
I have a lot of 4-ton fermentings. So 4 tons and 6 tons, 7 ton. That's my 2 micro, usually about 4 tons is one batch, and 4 and 7 tons of my. So there are 50 hectoliter tanks and 75 hectoliter tanks, if that was the size, but 4 and 6 tons.
Okay, is that okay, Keith? And Liz Saggis says, have all the vines been planted since... Oh, sorry, beg your pardon.
Thank you, yes.
Okay, and Liz was asking, have all the vines been planted since 1994? And are some still quite young?
It's a never-ending story for planting vines. We planted vines 2 weeks ago. Okay. So 2 weeks ago, we planted Chardonnay up at 600 meters. So we're gonna have some white wine in 4 years. But it's a never-ending process of when something gets to 25, 30 years old, if it's producing great, okay. But at some point, vine disease might take over. So for example, last year we had a 7-hectare vineyard, but there's probably 3 hectares of grapes in there because a lot of the plants had died. So, you keep rejuvenating and replanting. So every couple of years, maybe we plant 2 or 3, take out 2 or 3 hectares and replant 2 or 3 hectares. So it's kind of never ending in that sense. So yes, Liz, it was Liz who asked the question. I think you saw Liz. Some of the vines were planted 2 weeks ago, and some were planted in 1995. So it's a mix in a way, but usually you get your first fruit after 4 years, and then after 6 years, you start getting more complex fruit. The first fruit after 4 years is very fruity and very jovial, but not something for aging. And after 6 years, the roots get deep enough to start to feel the soil a little bit. And then 10 to 20 years for me is the really nice sweet spot between getting good production, but also some good character.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, though, you're not interested in older vines because there's increasing interest in the complexity and the quality you get from much older.
I love old vines. We're going to leave everything as long as we can, but the only vineyards we replant is if, like I said, if there's 7-hectare vineyard and there's only 3 hectares of grapes left, because every third plant has died. You get escar. There's some diseases that will destroy the plants after time. So this vineyard I'm talking about was planted in 1995, and it's a 3-hectare vineyard. And last year was the last fruit. It makes me sad. I still have the barrels, and that was the last year for that vineyard. But I mean, half the vineyard wasn't there anymore. So, and the tractor has to drive the same distance, and the people walk the same distance, and so at some point you have to make that call for the quality, and also, I gotta tell you, some of the things planted in 1995, there's better clones now, there's better roots, there's things now, we have a better understanding now which clones work better for Sangiovese. So I think it's going to be better in the end.
Yeah, one of the reasons also, Lawrence, maybe that we have to explain to people is that when we took over the estate in the 90s, some of the vineyards were already planted in the old style with the right blend for the Chianti Classico. So you had to say 8 rows of Sangiovese on the same vineyard. You had also maybe 1 row of Canaiolo, Trebbiano, or whatever else had to be on that blend. And obviously, when we look now with the knowledge we have, we would understand, even myself who are not in winemaking, but that is not the correct place to have all the grapes in the same, or have the blend already made in the vineyard. So,
because you also, you have to pick that all at the same time. And you might have Colorino that's 26 bricks and Sangiovese that's 22 bricks. And you have to pick the whole thing when you have that mix like that. But when I got here, for the first couple of years, there was a vineyard from the 70s that we were picking, and it was quite good. But, there wasn't a lot of plants still living. And it was a strange vineyard because there was everything in there. So big grapes, little grapes. No, but when I worked in California, we had some 100-year-old Zinfandel vines that were great. But there seems to be less disease out in California. It's less here.
Well, let's talk about something different then. Pass over to the first wine that we want to show. So these are the 3 labels that we produce in Chianti Classico, and they also represent the quality pyramid of Chianti Classico, with the Annata on the left side, in the middle the Riserva, and on the right side the Strada Sasso, which is our first Gran Selezione. All blends obviously that need to have at least 80% Sangiovese for the Chianti Classico, but then we add to the Annata 15% Merlot. And maybe, Lawrence, you can explain a little bit about why do you blend the Merlot to the Sangiovese on the Chianti Classico Annata?
The Sangiovese goes into the market quite fast, usually sometimes too fast, like a month after we bottle it, we have to sell the next year. And the joke in the business is, when is a wine ready? When the last one is sold out. I'm kidding, but sometimes the Chianti Classico is getting sold and drunk for me before it's ready, because it's sometimes 3 months after bottling. And what the Merlot does is the Merlot softens the outside of the palate, the acids in the Sangiovese, and kind of coats it. So it's, it ages the same as just as well, but initially the softness of the Merlot makes it more approachable sooner. So as we sell this wine out, usually in 1 year after bottling, it's sold out. So it's good when it hits the market. It's a little bit softer on the edge. You feel it a little bit on the softness.
Well, instead for the next 2 Chianti Classico, the Riserva and the Strada Sasso, the Gran Selezione, we mostly use Sangiovese coming from the La Porta vineyard. That is like the oldest vines of Sangiovese that we have. And we follow 2 different strategies. For the Riserva, we add some Cabernet Sauvignon, like 10%. And the Strada, as you were mentioning before, is just a barrel selection of pure Sangiovese.
So with the Cabernet Sauvignon, it does something different than the Merlot. For me, esoterically, I imagine it builds a center, a little like tannic center. that slowly comes out in the wine in your palate. So when you taste the Reserva, you feel the acids on the edge right away. And then slowly the tannins of the Cabernet Sauvignon fill that in. So it's like a reverse feeling than the Chianti Classico Annata. And the Cabernet Sauvignon probably ages a little bit better because of the tannins, of the Cabernet Sauvignon, the Reserva. So, and this we can sell 2 years, we have to sell a year, 2 years, right? 2 years after the harvest. So a little aging helps with this wine. So I like the Cabernet Sauvignon, and usually I pick some really nice Cabernet Sauvignon to go in there too. So it's quite fun for me to pick the Cabernet Sauvignon to go in this. We have 2 or 3 different Cabernet Sauvignons, and it's usually from San Donato is the name of the vineyard, which is a super area for the Cabernet Sauvignon for that. And then the Strato Sasso, that's, you know, from that vineyard in La Porta, it's usually almost every year the first grapes that are ripe for Sangiovese. And so it always gets big, powerful, ripe. So it's quite easy to make 100% Sangiovese from that block because it gets ripe every year without a doubt. And it's we basically pick my best 30 to 40 barrels, Pepe. It's about a 40 barrel blend to make this wine. And we make between 10 and 12,000 bottles, something like that, each year for this wine. So it's a good expression of that vineyard in front of San Gusmé. And if I ever do a vertical tasting to understand the different harvests here, if I take a vertical of 10 years of this wine, it's really, you understand the weather of the harvest because the vineyard hasn't changed, just the weather conditions have changed over those years. So it's a really good time capsule to understand what's going on here for the different type of harvests.
Just quickly, Lawrence, Keith Granger was asking, are you using any natural yeasts?
Some natural yeast, some ferments I just let go, but if they look a little high, getting 14.5 alcohol, you know, I have my yeast to add because I don't trust native yeasts sometimes, you know. So I do a little bit of both. You know, native yeast are a little more stressed. They smell a little funny at first, you know. But you know, when I worked in California, we were all native yeast, no SO2, very hippie winery. So I mean, I know very well the world of non-native yeast, and you get a higher VA with the native yeast usually because when you add the yeast, they start out quite strong and they muscle out any bad guys in there. So I have, you know, 5 or 6 different yeasts that I can use and the native yeast, depending on the type of wine and the type of year.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is now our second part of the production, so to say, what we call another expression of the same terroir. And this is expressed through Bordeaux blends, or at least that was how it started, because when we started with the production of in 2002, the first vintage of our Super Tuscans, we had 3 different blends, and over the years we have slowly started to understand what really thrives and what are the best vineyards and the best combinations of all this micro cru, and the style of the wines has a little bit changed. So the only one that has remained as a blend is Il Fauno, and it normally unifies all 4 grapes or international grapes that we have at the estate, mostly Merlot, then Cabernet Franc, then Cabernet Sauvignon, and at the end 3, 4, 5% of Petit Verdot to amalgamate the whole wine. But from the little guy, the Fauno, to the top wines, Valladona and Arcanum, the procedure for all these wines is the same. Like, there's always 50% maybe new oak or 60% new oak, and the rest is second used oak. we age all our wines, all our grapes or grape juice for 12 months. There is nothing more or nothing less actually on the aging in oak. And then the blends are made by tasting each single barrel coming from all these different micro crus, from all these different varietals. And yourself, Lawrence, and Pierre decide then what is the blend that has to been produced. Valladona has always been more Merlot driven, but in 2018, a fantastic Merlot year, you decided to just produce it as 100% Merlot. And since then, this is what has been done for Valladona. On the other side, I remember when you were making the blend with Pierre on the 2016 Arcanum, and when you looked at your shopping list, everything that was in there for this wine was just Cabernet Franc. So how did that feel when you put that together and make the jump to 100% Cabernet Franc?
Well, as the story goes for the jump for Arcanum, when I first got here in 2002, we had 1.2 hectares of Cabernet Franc, and now we have 17. So the 2002 Arcanum, we had one little block of Cabernet Franc in there. And so now the idea began in 2016 to make a blend, but a blend of different Cabernet Francs. We have Cabernet Franc at 350 meters up to 550 meters now. So we get a lot of different profiles. So when we're making the Arcanum wine, for me, it's still a blend. It's 100% Cabernet Franc, but it's a blend of certain types of vintage. Some are more supple, more round. Some are more mineral. Some are, if it's on more calcium soil, you get more minerality. If it's a little sandy soil, you get a little fatter, richer wines. So we make the blend of Arcanum now from different blocks of Cabernet Franc. And the Cabernet Franc grows quite well here. Hot years, cold years, it always produces very good quality grapes. Where some things like Cabernet Sauvignon, if it doesn't get warm enough, might be a little green. And Merlot, if it gets too hot, it might be ripe too soon. Cabernet Franc sort of in the middle there, so it works very well in this area. And now people are starting to plant Cabernet Franc around here. It's becoming a little popular now. And I see in the States now, I see a lot of Cabernet Franc wine, so it's becoming a little bit of a style. But we knew that back in 1998. So
yeah, but so with Cabernet Franc, we get the idea of this grape that is adapting better to climatic changes and performing very well. But at the same time, you were saying that Merlot is completely different and suffers more. So why did we change then in 2018 to 100% Merlot in Valladona?
Well, what we started to do is the Merlot that wasn't on a lot of clay, we grafted over starting in 2005 to Cabernet Franc. So the Merlot that we kept is the Merlot that's really in the really cool microclimates at Arceno. So the Merlot that we didn't regraft over to Cabernet Franc or to Sangiovese, things that get ripe later, the remaining Merlot gets ripe. We picked the Valladona, for example. We're already picking Sangiovese when I picked the Valladona. So the Merlot for the Valladona gets ripe at the beginning of the Sangiovese. So it doesn't suffer the heat so much for the area that it's in and for the soil that it's on, because clay retains the moisture. So in the end, we had a little bit less Merlot. So we kept the cream of the cream, and now we make the Valladona 100% Merlot. It's difficult. That's probably the hardest 100% wine to make, is probably the Valladona, because it's a little more fickle to weather.
Yeah, one thing that I always want to also point out when talking about our wines is what Pierre in the last years is always saying, that over this 20 or more years that he has producing now wines together with you and Michele at the estate, you are now at a point where you really catch the soul of the estate. And it might sound very philosophical, but on the other side, I think that is what the great winemakers do also, put together the philosophy, a life history to the wine producing.
You guys just hear that tractor go by? There's a big tractor go by. In front of the vineyard is a tractor go by. Oh, well.
Yeah, well, that is part of the game.
Another question from Keith, where he was asking, Lawrence,
Okay.
was, do you have any amphorae for aging?
No, but you know what? I'm thinking about it, Keith. We're expanding the winery right now. So in about 3 months, I'm going to have a whole lot more space to play with. So, you know, I might experiment a little bit for some Sangiovese. But right now, if I put it somewhere, it's going to get broken by a forklift or something because it's not enough room. But you know, I'm going to find a little corner and give it a shot. But I haven't really investigated too much. You know, I've gone tasting and tasted some amphora stuff, and you know they leave it on the skins in there forever. So it's going to be something. You know, I'll give it a shot.
Great.
What do you think I should do it with, Sangiovese?
The choice is yours.
Yeah. I'll probably try it with some Sangiovese. You know, I think it will work well with the Sangiovese because the bigger skin, less skin to juice ratio, so less tannins, more acids.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
Okay, so
I see the chat button here, but I'm afraid to click it because I don't know if I'm going to click myself out of the tasting. So I don't want to touch it. I see the chat with 4 chats, but I'm afraid to click it. So I'll stay away from that.
We've gone through those 4. There's obviously now the opportunity for anybody else attending to ask any questions to Laurence or Pepe before we finish.
Oh, okay.
We haven't talked.
Can I chip in with a couple of thoughts that have come up? What about sustainability? Or you were talking about disease earlier. You seem to have a problem with that. What are your practices with the viticulture? And are you seeing ways to become greener both there and in the rest of the production, or is it difficult because of the site?
I mean, in the production in the winery for the grapes I hate to use the word hippie again, but that was my origins. Ed Meads was very natural. So we don't add anything to wine, no enzymes, no tannins, all these things. The salespeople are always trying to sell me all these wine products. You know, they must hate when they come here because I don't buy anything from them. But so the wine is natural. In the vineyard, everything's going sustainability here, and we're going that way as well. It's a little harder here than say California, because basically California, it stops raining in June and doesn't start again until after harvest. Here we can get it's very humid and thunderstorms. So, I mean, we don't spray anything for insects, things like that. We use what Kelly calls it's the sexual traps. So we put a lot of traps that confuses the insects, you know. So we don't spray for anything, no insecticides, anything like that. When we do the pruning, we cut up the stems and put them back into the vineyard. We don't plant cover crops. We let the local cover crops grow because McKelly likes to keep what locally grows here to go back into the soil instead of like adding mustard or whatever people add, because you know it could change the flavor. You know, we use sulfur. So we have 2 weather stations here, which really help a lot of 2 different points of the estate. So we can know the humidity, temperature, if it's going to rain, and so we can avoid doing like sulfur sprays and things like that if we don't have to, because we have an idea that there's no risk at that point. So the idea is to do as little as possible, and we really only intervene if there's a emergency, and you know, that's things like copper. Everybody uses copper if you have mildew or things like that. So we're not biological or anything like that. Maybe we'll go there someday, but we're definitely sustainable in that sense. Everything's mechanical under the vines and mechanical. There's no spraying of anything. You still see people, some people still spray it. It's really, you can see it. You're driving by and you see under the rows are all nice and burnt. You're like, how did that happen? You know? So we have all these different sunflowers and things that, you know, clean under the rows. It's more labor intensive, more tractor driving, things like that. But, you know, I think, what do they still use the glyphosate in California? I don't know if that's legal anymore, but it was illegal here a long time before, I think.
There's one question here from Mark Millen. Mark, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, just a great presentation. Thank you very much. I'm just wondering the balance between your Chianti Classicos and your Super Tuscans. Is it 50-50? And is your love of playing with wines more geared towards the Super Tuscans or the Chiantis? You know, there's such different approaches.
You're asking me which child I like best, huh?
Yeah, I am.
I'll answer that question.
Yeah.
I mean, hectare-wise, I think we have a little bit more DOCG, maybe like 55-45, but right now it's about 50-50 in vineyard plantings, and it wasn't a plan, it just worked out that way. You know, it wasn't like one day we said, let's make it 50-50. It just, I added up one day, I said, it's about 50-50. But the next couple of things we're planting will put us more DOCG. The amount of volume in bottles is pretty similar. You know, we have Chianti Classico, which is a big production for us. And then the Fauno, which are both about 10,000 cases, say, or something like that. And then the other ones are a little, so it's pretty close to 50-50. One year there might be more Chianti Classico than the Fauno, but, you know, it's pretty close. What was the other question? Oh, the love, which one I like better? You know, that's a tough one. Probably the hardest wine to make. You have your children, the problem child. The Chianti Classico base is probably the hardest wine to make. Arcana, I can't say it's the easiest wine to make, but you know, you take your best Cabernet Franc and you have, you know, and it's a little bit. I love them all for different reasons. You know, what do I drink the most of? Everything, you know. But, you know, for the house wine, I probably drink, you know, Reserva and Fauno because it costs me less, you know. But no, I don't really have a favorite, you know. Sometimes I want something with acid, and sometimes I want that, you know, Cabernet Franc character. So it depends really on the mood when you're at home and you go into the cellar, what you feel like drinking. Yeah. So I'm happy to have that choice when I go into my cellar. If I feel like a 100% Sangiovese or a Merlot or a Cabernet Franc, I can make that choice. So I don't really have a favorite per se.
As an estate, for sure, we started producing more Super Tuscans. At the beginning, it was the 90s. The estate was bought by the Jackson family, so oriented for, at the beginning, an American market. It was the time of the Super Tuscans. Obviously, everything was crying and looking for Super Tuscans. But then over the years, we have seen how good the quality of Sangiovese is at the estate and how these two things don't exclude one to the other. So we have seen quite a good success on the Chianti Classico towards the Super Tuscans. I wouldn't undersign the fact that Super Tuscans are getting like dinosaurs and totally disappearing from the marketplace. For sure, the DOCG and the Chianti Classico in special has been working very tightly together between all the producers to produce always higher quality and to reaching out for that. So I think we can confidently say that we walk on two different pairs of shoes towards the future. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions from guests here?
Following on from Mark's question, well, what about the people you sell to? Is there a more demand now for the Chianti Classicos than the Super Tuscans, or in different markets? Where do you sell most of which wines?
It's hard to say, because you would argue that the northern markets, northern European markets and the US market look for more Super Tuscans. They like this maybe also more when there is more new barrels on the blends. When the
lower acid, Pepe.
Lower acid, yes, of course. That is something that these markets prefer. But actually, as I was saying before, we really are working very nicely on the US market now with the Chianti Classico. It almost has overcome the demand over the Fauno, which has always been like our fantastic selling product in the US, the Fauno. But now Chianti Classico Annata is still working as good as Il Fauno. So I'm not sure how to answer to this question. Yeah.
I think you know, 30 years ago, Chianti, people would say Chianti started getting a bad reputation, but now the quality is quite high. And I think more people understand Sangiovese in America than say 15, 20 years ago. And they're not afraid of the acid as much. Because, you know, I remember my first day here, 2002, I had a glass of Vino Nobile di Montepulciano here. And I thought someone squeezed a lemon in my glass. It was like so tart. And that was my first impression when I got off the boat to come here, is that level of acids. But then you start to, you know, love the acids and you look for the acids. And I think slowly the US market, or Canadian market, US market, are accepting the acids a little more. Maybe 20 years ago, you know, it's where you grow up. They grew up with California wines, I think, or Australian wines, which are softer and rounder. And, you know, DOCG, Chianti Classicos, are quite straight arrows, quite a lot of high acid and high octane Ferraris, if you want to say.
And is America your biggest market?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Also because consider also that we earn 2 times there, like we are our own importer. So it's obvious that we try to foment also that market a little bit more. But in the last 5 or 6 years, we have really seen also demand from all over the markets. Like Canada is a super good market for us. And we are, I think we have opened in the last 2 years about maybe 8 to 10 different countries in Asia. So no, the demand is coming from everywhere.
I remember I went to a Chianti Classico meeting and I saw the big pie chart they put up of all Chianti Classico producers, and most were at 60-70% to the US. So the market for almost everybody in this area is American, Canada, I guess. I mean, these are the markets that can grow. It's you know, if you make an extra 5,000 cases of wine to, you know, sell them in Italy, you can, but it's a little harder because, you know, not to use the word saturated, but, you know, there's a lot of wine here. So I think it's easier to expand your markets in non-wine producing countries for sure.
Okay,
but I'm not a businessman at all. Why am I talking about this? Tell me to keep quiet before I say something wrong.
You're fine, no worries.
Okay, I think apart from Keith, you might ask some rather nerdy questions, but via email to Laurence or Pepe, via Millie at a later date. I'd like to hand over to Liz to do our thank yous.
Can I add
sorry.
I just wanted to add one thing, which is that I'm going to be sending those who are based in the UK, and I think I could also send one to Neil when you're over here, a bottle of the Arcanum and also the Strada Alsasso for you to taste.
Wonderful.
What year Arcanum?
Yes.
What year, do you know?
2017.
That's a big rich one.
Well, many thanks.